last but not least, Mark Shepard. Mark Shepard is an artist, an architect whose work addresses contemporary entanglements of technology and urban life. You probably know his work, the Sentient City Survival Kit. If you don't know yet, you should check it out. Or maybe you'll mention it. Yes. He's also involved in academics, as you can see behind me. And he's also an editor of the Situated Technology pamphlet series, and co-author with Adam Greenfield, of the first pamphlet that was published in this series called Urban Computing and its Discontent, which is also a very interesting read. I can recommend it. So his talk is called Sentient Urbanism, and I don't think there's more to say, so go ahead.
Thanks, Yannick. And thanks Yves as well for inviting me, and Sarah for all the help she's done with the organization getting here and all of that. So the title of my talk today is Sentient Urbanism, and in a way it's really great to follow my time. Again, we seem to have a habit of doing this, so it makes my life easier in the sense that there's a groundwork already talking about smart cities. And it also, this being the last talk of the day, makes it perhaps more possible for me to be quicker, because I realize I'm the last thing standing between you and maybe a walk out in the nice weather or a drink. So I'll try to keep this quick, and so we have some time for some questions before the blood sugar levels drop to dangerous levels. Okay, so the title is Sentient Urbanism. Wonder if anybody wants to venture a guess when this quote is from. What year is this from? I mean, I'll read it. It says, "It is to the emerging trends in the communication system and to the production and distribution of technology that has come into existence with modern civilization that we must look for the symptoms which will indicate the probable future development of urbanism as a mode of social life." Does anybody want to wager a guess, or maybe you're familiar with the quote? Okay, decades. We accept decades too. What's that? 1860s? No, a little later actually, referring to the people writing in the 1860s. That was close. This was actually in 1938, Lewis Wirth, sociologist, Urbanism as a Way of Life. And, I find this quote instructive in the sense that it kind of positions within the context of the hype surrounding the smart city, and more recently perhaps the hype surrounding the smart citizen. It positions this debate in a kind of larger context, which ultimately is this question about the technological mediation of urban life and the role of media and communications technologies in how the social life of cities evolve. Okay. Now, obviously, by now it's commonplace in major metropolitan centers to find urban life increasingly entangled with a range of mobile and embedded media, communication and information technologies. On any given day, we gain access to transportation systems using a magnetic strip card or a radio frequency identification tag to pay a fare. We coordinate meeting times on the run using our mobile phone via SMS text messages. We check in at our favorite venues using social media apps on our mobile phones and leave tips for strangers about what to do there. We cluster in cafes and parks where Wi-Fi is free to check email on a laptop. We drive cars with onboard navigation systems that map optimal routes to a destination, updating in real time to take into account current traffic patterns, construction activity, and special events. We pass through public spaces blanketed by CCTV surveillance cameras, monitored by machine vision systems, running advanced face detection and object tracking algorithms. These conditions have fundamentally altered how we move through and inhabit the city and influences the choices we make there. Now, at the same time, data that these systems collect process and transmit and store enable ever greater control over the performance of urban systems and provide new insights into how the city is inhabited collectively. Architects, urban planners, city managers are all very interested in what this data can tell us about how the city is being used, providing new insights. So embedded sensors monitor, manage, and regulate utility services, critical urban infrastructure. Camera networks monitor street intersections and issue traffic violations using automatic license plate recognition software. Social media platforms like Twitter and Foursquare provide new ways of tracking how we move, whom we are with, where we go, and what we think of where we've been. Data on trending venues, popular neighborhoods, peak times, and common frequencies enable us to map patterns of mobility and activity in a more dynamic and fine-grained manner. So in an age of big data, some suggest, we have the opportunity to connect, aggregate, analyze, integrate information about the urban environment in ways that enable us to better visualize, model, and predict urban processes, simulate probable outcomes, and lead to ever more efficient and sustainable cities. So you're probably familiar with the current discourse, which revolves primarily around the smart city, as was introduced in a sense by Martijn, the idealized notion of the smart city, and in contrast then to the smart citizen, which tends to fall into a kind of top-down, bottom-up dichotomy. What I want to do is try to kind of unravel that a little bit today and try to look what might lie beneath and beyond this tension, let's say, between sort of the top-down smart city and the bottom-up smart citizen. So the proliferation of smart city initiatives in different parts of the world illustrates the dominant model for integrating information and communications technologies within urban environments. Massive urban development projects such as this Masdar city in the United Arab Emirates, or Songdo city that Martijn discussed, or even Planet Valley or Plan IT Valley in Portugal, exemplify this push by global ICT companies in consort with real estate developers and government agencies to build cities from scratch outfitted with so-called smart urban infrastructure, this bunch of infrastructure that Martijn was discussing. So this top-down centralized approach nominally promises to optimize the distribution of services and maximize energy efficiency, making cities more livable, sustainable, and of course competitive. Of course, it's also big business. The global market for smart cities solutions is projected to reach $20 billion by the year 2020, and the major ICT players have a lot invested in promoting this approach. In fact, when IBM reorganized its business model in 2002, it shifted its focus away from hardware design and manufacturing to enterprise software development. Within the broader marketing rubric of a smarter planet, which encompasses health, energy, marketing, and financial services markets, its Smarter Cities program was established to specifically target municipal governments with an interest in centralizing the control and management of data feeds from diverse city agencies within a single location. This is the Rio Operations Center, constructed in 2010 by IBM. This is, in fact, a really existing smart city project, and I think what's interesting or perhaps instructive about it is that rather than this kind of fanciful, ephemeral environment that we tend to see by marketing images or this diagram that we saw in the previous presentation, what you have is a kind of mid-20th century model of the control center, the command and control center, something that might be used for managing a NASA rocket flight, launching satellites into orbit. So contrasting this model, however, is one that places emphasis on the smart citizen rather than smart technologies. So shifting the focus from technology in the city to the role citizens might play in managing the urban environment, this bottom-up distributed approach aims to directly connect people living in cities with information about their local environment and solicit their participation in reporting conditions and taking action to effect positive change. One such initiative involves an ad hoc system for water level sensors placed in a local sewer system in Brooklyn by a collective of artists and activists. The project engages local residents in reducing the amount of pollution from combined sewer overflows that open when the sewer system is overloaded due to excessive stormwater runoff. It's really actionable information. The system alerts residents when overflows happen so that they might reduce their wastewater production during an overflow event. Don't Flush Me is the name of this project. You have a bulb which changes colors depending upon the conditions, or you can have the system text message you, letting you know when it's safe to flush your toilet. Other initiatives include a community-led air quality sensing network that gives people a way to participate in the conversation about air quality. Air quality is interesting, at least in New York City. There's only 5 stations, air quality monitoring stations in the entire city. And their sensing units are about 15 to 20 feet above the ground. And they tend to indicate a relatively coarse regional condition. And it's not very useful for understanding the finer grained dynamics of pollution affecting local conditions. So this project distributes inexpensive air quality sensors designed to allow anyone to collect high-resolution readings of NO2 or CO concentrations outside their home and share them via an online open data service. Here the intention is to shift the authority from the Environmental Protection Agency, from these 5 single stations, to a distributed community of people throughout the city with the intention that, for example, if you're interested in where you might run or jog that day, you'll have a finer grained level of information. You might be able to alter your route. Okay, so while these competing models promise compelling solutions to problems of urban regulation and management, each obviously presents differing limitations. That the smart city model extends 20th century urban design strategies that gave birth to cities such as Chandigarh and Brasilia should be cause for concern. And the critiques of top-down tabula rasa urbanism are in fact well known and really don't need repeating here. But perhaps more disconcerting is the degree to which the approach exemplified by Masdar, Songdo City, and the like promote a technocratic view of the city and urban development, and the dependence upon proprietary software systems and services, leading to a form of technological lock-in that runs counter to more traditional concessionary procurement models. The smart citizen model would seem to address these concerns in its more organic, ad hoc, evolutionary, and distributed approach. Its focus on people, not technology, as the primary actors in the system, reaffirms notions of participatory governance, where social and cultural factors are emphasized over high-tech solutions with big price tags. Yet problems regarding the need for some form of centralization inevitably arise when one attempts to scale these local solutions to larger urban systems, where questions of interoperability between different systems and the development of open standards for sharing data between them become paramount, right? Moreover, it is perhaps what these models share in common that is problematic for urban life in smart cities inhabited by smart citizens. Both take as their purview the more functional and mundane aspects of city governance and management, and fail to address some of the deeper social, cultural, cognitive, and perceptual conditions of contemporary urban space. While creating more efficient and sustainable urban environments is a worthy and an increasingly urgent goal, I mean, we all know this, urban life itself, though, has never been something circumscribed by concerns for optimization and efficiency. Forms of urban life found in cities have always been messier than that, and we have long known that one of the keys to great cities is their capacity to sustain the diversity and the variety of urban life. Finally, we have to ask what it means to call a city or its citizens smart in the first place. Right? This term smart has been popularized primarily by marketing departments of large technology companies, and it's hard to argue with their logic. Right? Who would want to live in a dumb city, right? Or who would want to be a dumb citizen, right? Who would want to make dumb advertisements? I was taken, though, by Bruce Sterling's response to Dan Hill's essay on the smart city, or a manifesto of smart citizens instead. If you haven't read this, it's actually a very good read. But, embedded within the popular notion of the word smart is the idea that the optimizations and efficiencies these technologies promise will inevitably make for a better life. Well, maybe, maybe not, or at least neither always nor everywhere, and rarely for everyone. And so I'll read this. Sorry for so much text, but this is Bruce Sterling writing in response to Dan Hill. He says, "I like other people's cities. I like cities where I'm not eager, engaged, canny urban participant, where I'm not smart and I'm certainly not a citizen, and where the infrastructures and the policies are mysterious to me. Preferably, even the explanations should be in a language I can't read. So I'm maximizing my inefficiency. I do it because it's so enlivening and so stimulating, and I can't be the only one with that approach to urbanism. Presumably, there's some kind of class of us, flaneuring, deriving, situationist smart city dropouts. A real smart city would probably build zones of some kind for us, the maximum inefficiency anti-smart bohemians." Well, unfortunately, Sterling's call for a temporary autonomous zone for smart city dropouts ultimately leads to the smart city ghetto for nostalgic neo-bohemians. This is an image from Williamsburg in Brooklyn, New York. It could be from Neukölln in Berlin. We're familiar with these contexts. Yeah. In the end, the smart city, smart citizen dichotomy results in a kind of rhetorical paralysis, right? Change seldom arises from purely top-down or bottom-up systems and processes, and pitching each paradigm in opposition to the other simply reifies their shortcomings, right? The more successful integrations, exchanges, and entanglements between technology and urban life will most likely take shape through far more subtle and nuanced hybrids than these paradigmatic polemics promise. So, I'd like to try to look beneath and perhaps beyond the smart city of smart citizens toward another way of looking at the relationship between technology and urban life. As we know, cities have always been sites of interaction and exchange, of people, of goods, services, information, of ideas. And technology has long been complicit in social change and transformation of the urban environment. As the German sociologist Georg Simmel notes at the beginning of the 20th century, that before the introduction of buses, subways, and trains in Berlin, people weren't accustomed to staring at each other over the course of minutes or hours without speaking to each other on a commuter train on the way home. Today, hiding oneself behind one's mobile phone on the subway is an established spatial practice by which we manage these awkward social situations. So, along with these new technological transformations come new social situations, and vice versa, and with them new spatial practices for negotiating daily urban life. Questions concerning attention and distraction and the influence of new technologies on the perceptual conditions of urban space and the cognitive states of those who live in cities are in fact long-standing, right? This is not something new. Walter Benjamin's oft-cited observation that architecture is primarily received in a state of distraction and Simmel's discussion of the origins of the blasé attitude remain entirely relevant to an analysis of contemporary urban environments. More recently, Clive Thompson has described a new kind of ambient awareness emerging out of social media such as Twitter and Facebook status updates. Individually, these short strings of texts are relatively meaningless, but providing quotidian updates on the minutiae of the daily lives of friends and acquaintances. Yet, by skimming these short bits of information, Thompson suggests, we construct a peripheral awareness, a co-presence of sorts with these absent others. As information is distributed across physical and virtual environments, our attention becomes divided not just within our field of vision, as Simmel noted, but also between two radically different fields of vision, one human and one non-human. This is an image from Google Glass, where we've got reminders for Paul. Paul owes you $20. Ask him about his trendy scarf. Now, techno-evangelists, as I like to call them, herald a coming age of urban infrastructure capable of sensing and responding to the events and the activities that transpire within and around it. Able to remember, to correlate, and most importantly, to anticipate. This near-future city is projected as one that reflexively monitors our behavior within it and becomes an active agent in the organization of our daily lives. Now, few people will probably protest or probably have a problem with smart traffic control systems that more efficiently manage the flow of traffic on city streets. Now, most of us don't like to sit in traffic. Some are likely to be irritated when a discount coupon for your favorite espresso drink, as identified by your credit card transaction history, suddenly appears on your mobile phone as you pass by a retail coffee franchise. Many, however, are likely to protest when a subway turnstile denies them access to the subway system based on their purchasing history, their recent mobility patterns, current galvanic skin response reading, as measured by sensors embedded in the steel turnstile bar, when all of these indicators match the profile of a terrorist. Now, when I first began working on this was a couple of years ago, and with the recent revelations over the past year by Edward Snowden, obviously this is no longer science fiction. This has become science fact, right? So we know this is happening. So as we move beyond the initial practices and promises of both the smart city and the smart citizen, we find information processing capacity approaching a higher order of magnitude. Here, your transaction history, what you've bought, mobility patterns, where you've been, and your personal profile, sex, age, zip code, and related demographics, are mined for patterns that match known profiles of a potential customer on the one hand, or possible terrorist on the other. And inferences can be made, what you might buy next, or where you might strike next. These computational systems operate on metadata, and having been trained to what to look for using machine learning techniques, their performance is measured in terms of what's called a false positive or a false negative. Within this context, urban systems and infrastructures take on a quality of what I'm suggesting might be best described as sentience, right? Well, what is sentience? The term sentient provides a useful way to foreground, I think, the subjective relations that underlie much of the technology that's currently being promoted by corporate marketing departments as smart. Sentience is derived from the Latin word sentire, which refers to the ability to feel or perceive subjectively. But importantly, it doesn't necessarily include human faculties of reasoning or self-awareness, which is to say that the possession of sapience, right, meaning to know, is not required for something to be sentient. Here it's important to differentiate between the act of sensing and that of having a sensation. Sensing, the thinking goes, is something animals and some plants and some machines can do. It involves, a sensing organ or a device that enables the organic or the inorganic system of which it is a part to actively respond to things happening around it. An organism may sense heat, light, sound, or the presence of rain, for example. Yet having a sensation or a feeling is something which goes beyond mere sensing, for it involves an internal state in which information about the environment, gathered through inputs, is processed by that organism or system so that it comes to have a subjective character. This is a face recognition software being applied to targeted advertising based on demographics, in this case simple gender mining. Qualia is the philosophical term for this, which Daniel Dennett defines as an unfamiliar term that could not be more familiar to each of us, the way things seem to us. So a sentient city then is one that is able to perceive things happening within it, yet doesn't necessarily know anything in particular about them. This is important on two levels. First, it elides some of the epistemological quagmires of artificial intelligence, which is referred to as strong AI, that continue to plague the development of systems and infrastructures that exhibit human level or higher in intelligence, right? Specifically, the claim that a computer which behaves as intelligently as a person must also necessarily have a mind and consciousness, right? Sentience doesn't require this. And it does so by incorporating the assistance of people in the process of producing and, most importantly, performing or enacting within mediated urban situations. Okay, so this contrasts obviously quite strongly with the popular notion of the smart city that often cedes human agency to these systems and their algorithms, often downplaying the roles people play and the decisions they make in their development, their operation, and internal functioning. This is usually cited as a benefit, right? Reducing human limitations, error, or prejudice in managing smart urban infrastructures is generally perceived as a positive design goal, regardless of how smart a city's citizens might be. And, of course, we're all familiar with, the dilemmas there. One thinks about, even in popular culture, the film Brazil, and the difference between being named Tuttle or Buttle on Christmas Eve. Sentient urbanism, perhaps more important is that this notion of sentient urbanism affords thinking about urban systems and infrastructures as complex techno-social entanglements of people and machines, where people remain in the loop, so to speak. It's not about magic, right? And it's not about something automagically happening, but it's actually about a complex negotiation between people and these intelligent systems. So in this sense, the city, its systems and infrastructures cannot be separated from the citizens by which it is constituted and through whose spatial practices it's given form, right? So what I'm suggesting and what I'm arguing is essentially that, this dichotomy makes no sense, right? So Rob Kitchen and Martin Dodge have suggested that these kinds of code space need to be understood ontogenetically. That is, something brought into being through specific practices that alter the conditions under which space itself is reproduced. Building on the work of Adrian Mackenzie, they differentiate between technicity, which is the productive power to make things happen, and the manifestation of this power through transduction, or the constant making anew of a domain in reiterative and transformative practices. Good example of code space might be the check-in hall, for example, at an airport, right? Where when the technological systems go down, the space itself actually ceases to exist as a check-in hall, right? It's a very different condition. What this means for questions of autonomy and agency is that both are the product of a negotiation between people and these devices, systems, and infrastructures, and that neither can claim sole ownership of these capacities. While technologies contain affordances, let's call that kind of field of possibilities for action, let's say, they often but not always require human agency for them to act in the world, right? Without any action on my part, this thing ultimately remains a lump of silicon and metal, right? So hacking and appropriation, for instance, expand the technicity of a given technology, in other words, its ability to do things in the world, through creative transductions that are discovered or invented in the process, right? So if the sentient city then is understood as an assemblage of code, people, and space brought into being through specific techno-social performances or enactments within the course of daily life, then it's capable not only of developing a mind of its own, of which we're a part, but also reflecting both existing and new power relations, insofar it actually becomes constitutive of these very relations. So if the sentient city is understood as, this is a visualization of 24 hours of Foursquare check-ins in Istanbul. And what I want to suggest is that as we look forward to tomorrow's cities, we might ask how these conditions alter how we conceive of urbanism in this expanded field, and ultimately how they might help us identify what new sites and working methods might emerge in its wake. And most importantly, when we're talking about urban media, when we're talking about sort of media interventions in urban public space, we need to expand what we understand and are anticipating in terms of the sites and the conditions we're going to be addressing. And how we engage these conditions is really an open question. I'd like to sort of wrap up then with just quickly introducing one response that I've been engaged with into producing a series of artifacts, a kind of archaeology of this near future. Archaeology involves the reconstruction of a world through fragments of artifacts where past cultures are reconstituted in the present through specific socializing and spatializing practices involving mapping, classifying, collecting, and curating. Cultural knowledge in this case is reproduced through relating in space and time the traces and remains of people, places, and things, activities, and events. And collections of archaeological artifacts serve to reveal everyday social and spatial relations of societies not contemporary with ours, yet recontextualized within the present, right? So through these fragments and traces of the past, we recontextualize them in the present and in a sense revive that moment in time. Greg Stevenson is an archaeologist who refers to an archaeology of the contemporary past as the design history of the everyday, where common objects drawn from daily life don't simply passively reflect cultural forces, such as trends in taste and fashion, for example, but also actively participate in shaping the evolving social and spatial relations between people and their environment. So what might it mean to create marked or unmarked artifacts, spaces, and media for a culture located not in the contemporary past, but in the proximate future? Right? That's the kind of premise of this project. So it's not about predicting or forecasting the future, right? It's not about writing white papers for IBM and predicting what they should be focusing on over the next 10 to 20 years, but working with the kind of raw material of present-day speculative projections upstream, so like the work that's going on in science and technology research, and designing artifacts, spaces, and media that stimulate public discourse in the present about just what kind of future we might want. So, in a sense, it's not about designing applications for, but actually designing implications of emerging technology. So how might we construct this near future city, this environment, through traces and artifacts that it's left behind, so to speak. The project was influenced quite directly by this photo by Warren Chalk. This accompanied the exhibition that Martijn was talking about, the Living City exhibition by Archigram in the 60s. And this is the Living City survival kit. And what you see is the kind of flotsam and jetsam of everyday life in sort of the 60s in London. And, at the moment when, there was a kind of response to the kind of over-functional the functionalization of urban environments through people like Jose Luis Sert and these books, Can Our Cities Survive, and so forth. So you see things like Ornette Coleman, jazz, sort of products, consumer products, all the kind of flotsam and jetsam of everyday life, which somehow sort of high modern and urban design was trying to eradicate from life. Ultimately, the question Warren Chalk had was, can the vitality of cities survive, and ultimately can the vitality of an architect survive? I'm going to play a short video. It's about 5 minutes to close, and this is like any good survival kit. It's a user's guide, and we'll play that, and then I can take any questions. Let's see if we can get some sound.
quick. Start. Guide. Start quick. In the near future, finding your way from point A to point B will not be the problem. Maintaining consciousness of what happens along the way might be more difficult. This alternative navigation app for mobile phones is designed to help you find something by looking for something else. Simply head out into the city and start the app. Enter a destination or let the app select one for you. You can increase or decrease the complexity of the route the app generates for you. Once you are happy with the route, tap Start and you are on your way. Turn-by-turn directions from a web-based routing service are combined with instructions for movements and actions to take at each step of the way. Follow the instructions diligently and you are sure to find small slippages and minor displacements within an otherwise optimized and efficient route. In the near future, Sentient Shopping Center, item-level tagging and discrete data sniffing will become both pervasive corporate culture and a common criminal pastime. This popular product line consists of his and hers underwear designed to sense hidden radio frequency identification tag readers and alert the wearer to their presence. Small vibrating motors sewn into strategic locations on the garments are activated when the RFID antenna detects the presence of a reader nearby. Wear these garments while you are out and about to ensure that shopping remains a stimulating, if no longer secure, experience. In a near-future world where all network traffic is monitored via smart filters, where access privileges are dynamically granted and denied on the fly based on your credit card transaction history, and where bandwidth is a function of your market capitalization. Standard commuter gear includes this travel mug designed for creating ad hoc dark networks for communication along a morning commute. The mug incorporates a mobile phone screen embedded in the lid of the mug, together with a small wireless mesh networking radio and microcontroller. Caffeine-fueled commuters share short messages between them throughout the ride. Create your message by tapping the metal dot on the side of the mug, and then make a drinking gesture to broadcast it to other mugs on the network. Others receive your message instantly, and can respond in turn. The more mugs the merrier, as each extends the network. Half a dozen mugs is enough to create a network along an entire train under normal conditions. When human vision is no longer the only game in town, don't leave home without this unique umbrella studded with infrared LEDs, designed to flirt with computer vision algorithms of advanced surveillance systems. The umbrella consists of 256 infrared LEDs inserted into its canopy, powered by 8 lithium polymer batteries concealed in its stalk. These LEDs are visible only to CCD surveillance systems set to night vision mode. These systems commonly track figures using a sophisticated algorithm to distinguish moving objects in the foreground of an image from a static background. By turning the umbrella on and off, you can alter the registration of foreground and background pixels stored in system memory, thereby frustrating attempts by the algorithm to track moving objects in the image.
Okay, so I said just in closing that, again, and this is less about trying to sort of predict future conditions, but more about creating kind of concrete artifacts around which we can organize a set of concerns in terms of just what kind of future we might want. Okay. Thank you.
Mark? Hello? Thank you, Mark. Any question? No, it's the last talk. I think
Sure. I think there's one over there.
it's good you're here.
So I really like the last video, and then I was just wondering, it's like a kind of, each of the project, is it, obviously it's a working model. Like, have you had extensive kind of amount of experimental just to see actually how it would work between in the actual urban settings? I was wondering if it was just the video is demonstrating how it works, but I was curious also to see actually, for example, the mugs actually being used in urban spaces. Like, have you ever had an experience in the setting for people to play in an extensive amount of time?
Yeah, sure. So Serendipity, the mobile app, is available on the App Store for free. And there's about 6,000 people who've downloaded it around the world. I do walks with Serendipity at festivals, like at Transmedial or DEF, Dutch Electronic Arts Festival, and Ars Electronica, and so forth. Then, what's interesting is that was the app which, there's a bit of irony in each of the projects, and that was the one which I thought was most ironic, right? What does it mean when we're living in a society which needs to download an app to have a serendipitous experience, right? So, but what surprised me is that it was actually quite popular, and that people really enjoyed doing these walks, specifically with 2 or 3 people, because there was a kind of context, or at least let's say there was a pretext to kind of move through the city and occupy it in ways which weren't sort of predetermined by patterns of work or patterns of leisure and so forth. So that's one which I've used. The other pieces are that the umbrella has been installed and exhibited in a gallery context, but not in terms of something which is designed as a product or delivered as a product. One of the things about these kinds of artifacts is they sort of suggest, you have to ask, well, who made this, right? And who distributes it? Is it something which is mass-produced? Is it an artisanal thing you're going to find in some kind of hipster boutique? What is this thing? And there was once I was showing it at a place called IBEAM, Art and Technology Center in New York City, and there was an engineer from IBM who came and was looking at the exhibition, and he was really interested in this idea of, and he brought this to the table, not me, but he says, this really looks like this is made by a citizen engineer, isn't it? Right? And of course I said yes. Of course it's a citizen engineer, but to me, it's less, I would say, it's more important to have those kind of conversations around these pieces than to actually see them produced and actually functioning as a product, right? So it's, how one influences the discourse surrounding questions about the sentient city, or the smart city, let's say, versus the smart citizen, than seeing these as functioning products in the world, right? They're conversation pieces, ultimately, addressing matters of concern, hopefully.
Okay. One more is so about that app that you made a comment that it's kind of ironic to actually download the app to experience the serendipity. Have you ever thought of actually kind of a completely non-technical version of that type of? You said that you did a walk actually, right? So is that the kind of like did that come first, or like how did your original process go by? Did you first start as an app first, or I think?
That's a really good question. So the app was developed at V2, the Institute for Unstable Media. I hate to say, I think almost 4 years ago now. It's in dire need of an update. But we began by doing just paper trials and studies. So we would write little instructions on little strips of paper, put them in an envelope, give them to people to go out in the city. There were suggestions. Some of the suggestions were involving photography, take a picture. And, we did extensive kind of post-experience interviews with people who tried this experiment. And we found there were a couple of types of instructions that were most popular. So the instructions break down into 4 different categories. One has to do with following people. The other, people, things, dogs. Another set has to do with interacting or engaging somebody, a stranger on the street. So, for example, one was it works by pulling in the first part of Google's routing directions. So, turn left, walk 50 feet, then, and appended to it is instructions which we wrote or I wrote, and the instruction would be, for example, then walk to the nearest flower shop, buy a flower. I was in Rotterdam. There's lots of flower shops there. The Netherlands is nuts with flowers, and give it to somebody on the street, right? And the interesting thing in Rotterdam was that it's very hard to give a stranger a flower on the street. They think. It's like I got in a 5-minute conversation, with this one woman, and she was like, "Yeah, thanks, but I've got to get on my bike and go to the train, and I don't have a place to put it." And so then I thought, I'll try somebody else. I tried to give it to a guy, and he was like, He thought for a minute. And he kind of looked at me, and then he looked at my shoes for some reason, and then just kind of said, "No, thanks." But. The other types are things like geometries, looking for abstract, follow the next line you see until it ends, and then geographic features. So walk toward the river, right? If there's no river, make one, right? Or head over the nearest bridge, things like that. And it was really through this user testing, really it wasn't user testing, it was this kind of prototyping and trials that we were able to capture the kinds of things people would respond to, right, and kind of built that into the app. So there was no technology until, basically we wrote the app in about a week, and then we rewrote it about 20 times over the next year. But yeah, that's the process. That's how it worked.
The first experiment, the paper prototype almost kind of reminds me of like almost early Dada.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely influenced by people like Vito Acconci, his following piece, Fluxus, their whole sort of performance manual. So any instruction-based art. Right? I was interested just on one level, the kinds of dialogues we have with our devices. We tend to be, if you step back and you look at it, we're pretty subservient, right? There's a text message which comes, we tend to look at the phone. There's that urge to, if you're given an instruction with Google Maps to follow a route from point A to point B, we generally accept that, even though we know that sometimes it leads us into oncoming trains, over cliffs, into dead ends and things like this. So it's a little bit about wanting to play with that kind of instructing logic that is embedded in these types of technologies. Yeah. But yes, there's also Julian Bleecker, maybe some people know him. Julian Bleecker more recently made, it's called Drift Deck, and it's a deck of cards, which also, in this kind of context of these, sort of randomizers, right, gives you instructions to perform as you're moving through cities. There's a whole field of people doing this kind of work. There's like Social Fiction does their dot walk, which are just algorithmic instructions for moving, go left, right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question.
The last question, maybe.
I think everybody wants a drink.
I think, yeah.
Let's do it. Right.
Well, then, thanks to everyone for coming, and see you tomorrow for even more interesting presentations.
Right. Thank you.